I'm Christina Rea, and welcome to Breaking Out of Breaking In, a practical filmmaking podcast about taking your creative career into your own hands and making great work that gets seen without playing the Hollywood game.
Or at least while changing the rules. Hi, I'm Brie Castellini, your other co-host, and today we are breaking down our favorite narrative tropes. Before we dive in, remember that we release bonus content for each and every episode of this podcast over on patreon.com/breakingoutpod. So if you want to support us and get yourself even more info and resources, go check that out. Today will probably just be a master list of all the content that we talked about and recommended, in addition to probably some bonus stuff. So, Christina, tropes.
Tropes. Yes, tropes. As usual, I didn't fill out the document, and you did.
Well, because my brain is so scattered that if I don't write something down, then I won't say anything.
Sure. I quickly put a bunch of stuff in my phone, like little bullet points of things that immediately came to mind.
Okay. So you want to go first? What was your first bullet point?
Okay, my first bullet point, it's also poorly organized. Because I was like, oh yeah, and that ties to this one, and it's like 5 down. I would say one of my favorite tropes is the "and then there were none" trope of like one of us is the killer kind of a thing.
Okay.
And that I think spans like genres. Like one of my favorite movies is Clue, but then also The Thing. I don't know if you've seen The Thing. Have you seen Clue?
I feel like I have, but I also may have just seen enough memes that I think I've seen Clue. So it's hard to say.
Yeah, okay. Well, The Thing is like an approach to that with an alien invader taking over bodies. And also, did you watch Boy Meets World?
I did, not as closely as like Lizzie McGuire, but I did watch Boy Meets World. I'm familiar with it.
One of my favorite episodes of that show is "And Then There Was Sean." That's the title of it. But it's like a spoof of a slasher movie. And it's the peak of like, I Know What You Did Last Summer, Scream, sort of bringing back to life the slashers of the 90s.
Sure.
And Jennifer Love Hewitt has a cameo in it. Her name is Jennifer Love Pfefferman. Now I'm just going off on a whole tangent for Boy Meets World
so
fans.
What do you like about the "and then there were one" or "then there was one" trope?
I just like that the sort of whodunit of it, but that it's like you have to read people and it's one of the people that you may be rooting for. And I think that's why I love Scream because it's so meta and it is like playing with tropes in general. But I also love that it's like one of the main characters is the killer, which I think that kicked off in a way. Other slashers there definitely were earlier ones where one of the people you're following is the killer, but the more famous slashers were like a masked outsider character like Halloween or Friday the 13th. It wasn't like a whodunit, just like who's going to get picked off next. Whereas when it's about trying to read people and look for clues and seeing who you can trust, I like that. And I've, done that myself. I did it pretty poorly in my first feature Summit. I was 21 though when I wrote it, so And that also was playing with slasher tropes, but I think in a way where I didn't lean into it enough. Mm-hmm. But then I also sort of used tropes to like justify plot. And so it was kind of like not enough on either end.
Sure. You're 21. It happens.
Right, I was 21. It was my
first
feature. It was an experiment. It was my first, even though my first, we've talked about this already, it was like my first real big project. And Game Brunch is also a play with that in like a very different way. I like just this idea of someone here is up to no good and the audience has to figure it out. And I played, I subverted that with Game Brunch in a different kind of way.
Cool. Are there bad examples of this or bad versions of this that you've seen that you're like, this is technically this trope, but I hate this version?
I mean, of course, yeah. I don't want to like out too many bad things just because horror movies do it all the time.
Stylistically, then higher level, like what about a bad one?
I would say it's just like not smart, where it's not being clever or playing with what's already been done. It's just sort of regurgitating that. And I would say, okay, like the new Scream 5, but it's called just Scream, is an example for me of that in a boring way because
Sure.
I don't know. Have you seen the new Scream?
I haven't seen any of the Screams. You know me. I'm not really a movie person in general, but I'm also not a horror movie person at all.
Right. Scream is one of my favorite movies. And like I said earlier, it is partly because it's playing with tropes so much. And it's such a meta movie that like
everyone I know who loves horror like is obsessed with Scream. So I'm sure at some point I will see Scream.
The thing is, like, I don't know if you can, I think you would still enjoy it because the writing's sharp and the acting's great and it's fun. But it has now been like, now people have done Scream in a variety of ways. What Scream did, you know, they've done like in a lesser way. And I would say
Sure.
the new Scream is a version of that where like it's being meta on meta, and on a scene by scene basis it works at times, but like the writing and the acting is not where it needs to be to really pull it off in a unique way. It's just kind of regurgitating what Scream did, even down to like the tropes where it is subverting the exact same things that movie subverted. So it's not like
Sure.
clever, it's just a rehash.
And that's probably something we could say about a lot of the tropes just in general. Like, you know, we wanted to talk about tropes just because like I think that there is a version of like media critique that's like anything with tropes is bad because it's not unique, but it's like nothing is unique. And I do think that it's worth celebrating the common aspects of media and film and storytelling that we do still enjoy. But the key is always, if you're going to do a fairly common trope, you have to do something new with it, whether it's subverting how that trope normally works, whether it's putting uncharacteristic people into a trope that we've seen with other people and other types of characters, like playing with archetypes and that kind of stuff. You have to be doing something inventive with it in order for it to be worth it. Otherwise, like, you are just doing a checklist of like, okay, I've got these 3 tropes, therefore I'm going to make $1 million.
Right. I think that, and like, I think it's impossible to make a horror movie now without engaging with tropes in some way, just because
Sure.
it's possible to be original, like completely, because there's so many stories have already been told. And so there is that fine line between like, are you just checking the boxes of tropes, or are you actually engaging with them in a clever way where you're doing something unique or doing a play on them that's original or fresh or just funny? I think if you're going funny, then you can kind of go super cliche. But if you're not, then it's a really fine line.
Yeah, I think that's true. Well, my first trope is one that I knew I would share with Christina because we've talked about it in the past, but it's definitely enemies to lovers. One of my absolute favorite tropes of all time is always going to be enemies to lovers. And I think for me, it's just the psychology of like someone who likes to argue a lot. Like, for me, arguments are like the most fun thing to write about. They're engaging, they're inherently dramatic. There's so much you can do throughout an argument. And so like when you pair 2 people with like very strong personalities that are constantly fighting, and then also eventually they kiss, that's just excellent stuff. Just excellent stuff.
I agree with that. I think also why I like it so much is, even though it's obviously written to be, you know, it's not real life.
Right.
That subgenre of romantic comedy is most enjoyable because I feel like the people are being themselves.
Yeah, that's a good point.
We've talked about in a previous episode when Kelsey was on and we were talking about, I guess, writing from personal experience. I think that was the episode. We talked about rom-coms a little, and I said I find it kind of boring when people are like pursuing love. And I agree, I still feel that way. Like, I think when you're putting on a persona and you're dating and you're doing the like, let me get to know you, that always reads as so false in movies because that's not how it would really play out. But when it's already this like heightened situation where they're on opposite sides of whatever, it's not like a by the numbers dating.
You can fall in love at your worst, then imagine how good the best is
right.
gonna be.
And so that's also why I like the fake dating. I don't know if that was on your list, but
that's number 2. Hell yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so same. Like, because they're being themselves, they're not trying to impress each other, then it feels like a more organic love story I can buy, as opposed to like they went on 3 dates and it's this epic romance, and when really it'd be kind of creepy like how quickly they fall in love in those movies.
Yeah. No, I like what you said about it being like more honest in some ways, because like I feel this way about like a lot of relationships. It's like, you know, you have those friends who you can't be honest with. Not really. Like it's not that you're being dishonest. It's just that there's always this sort of wall up where you don't feel completely comfortable to just like say what's on your mind. And obviously that's such a vital part of a healthy relationship. So enemies to lovers forces you to immediately constantly be like bearing your soul to this other person. And yeah, it's like the worst, ugliest parts, but at least it's honest. At least there's, you know, not really a potential to like they know what they're getting. They know exactly who you are. And if they decide like, oh yeah, this is doing it for me, I think that works. I will say for types of this trope that don't work for me, obviously is like, there's definitely a line. And some, like, certainly, like, romance and erotica readers like when things go over the line a little bit more. Like, there's definitely darker enemies to lovers stuff that is not really my jam, that even in the fantasy element of, like, a romance world, if it's a little too rough or problematic, I don't like it. It's like, no, you don't get... it's always the guy. You don't get to get the girl after this. Like you should be in jail. You should certainly not be like, you know, but it's the animal attraction and it's fine. I don't like that. I think that's just not my jam. I will also say there are exceptions to this exception to my fake dating era for my enemies to lovers loving, but I do get kind of annoyed when it turns out that the reason for like the kernel that made them enemies was just like a miscommunication. Not always, but I don't like it when it's like, oh, they didn't need to be enemies. Like there was just one weird thing that happened and then they both, or one of them blew it out of proportion. And so the other one is reacting to that. I find that less interesting than two people who do have fundamental differences and are probably blowing things out of proportion. But like, I don't know, I don't feel as much of a spark when it's like one person's just very nice, but has been turned into a mean person. You know, I'm like, let them be problematic. Let them be troublesome. Like, I think that it's more interesting to watch a character have to reckon with their own bullshit rather than being like, oh, I said rice, not race. And this whole thing could have been, you know, like, I don't like it when it boils down to that. And it's like, okay, fine. So now we're in love forever. Like you actually have to work something out through enemies to lovers.
Yes,
I think.
I agree. On that note, though, I agree with you, but that only works when there's going to be real growth from one of the characters.
For sure. Yeah.
And did you see, I don't know what it's called, and maybe it's better that I don't name it, but there was this Netflix rom-com that just came out like 2 weeks ago, and it was a military.
I've heard of it. I have not seen it, though.
I haven't seen it. I watched it's one of those like autoplay situations with Netflix where I watch the whole trailer and it tells you the whole movie, basically. Sure. And then I was like, let me look up reviews because I'm curious. And of course they weren't good. But the plot is like a super left bartender, like left-leaning politically bartender has a fake relationship with, goes with 1 and 2 of yours because they're also like enemies to lovers, but it's also
those
a
are
fake
often what goes together because it's fun when people who hate each other have to pretend to love each other, right? Like it's the best pairing. It's a good wine and entree pairing. But continue.
Yes. So she needs health insurance because she just got diagnosed with diabetes and can't afford the meds, insulin. And there's like a good political commentary in that, but it really doesn't like actually address the issue with America in that. It's just a plot device essentially. And he's military in the Navy,
guy, right?
I think. I think it's the Navy. I don't know. But
and he says some like real racist shit within the first 10 minutes that they never address.
Yes, exactly. And he needs money for some reason. I didn't quite get it from the trailer, but he agrees to have a fake wedding to get the military benefits so she can get a health insurance. And of course they fall in love. But one of the interviews I read with the actress, she was like, oh, it's about meeting in the middle, and one is like super extreme on the left and one is super extreme on the right, and they find a more moderate love story. And I'm like, that's not what anyone's rooting for. And like
No.
wanting health insurance is not extreme. It is not left.
Wow, what are you, a socialist?
And like
Yeah.
being racist is not something that you should meet in the middle on. Like that movie would be okay if he does a whole, character arc where he evolves as a human and
well, what
realizes
if he gives up his racism against like half of the people he's racist against? Like, can he pick and choose? Like, is it okay if he's racist against some people? That's improvement, right?
So yeah, that was
meeting in the middle.
That was the one thing about that where I think that trope can be done absolutely horrifically.
Yes, for sure. But I think that like most stories are worse when there isn't some kind of arc for a character, where there's not some kind of change. Like, the most famous, obviously, version of enemies to lovers, for good reasons, is Pride and Prejudice, which is, I think, there's a reason why it gets retold every couple of years in a totally different way, and it fucking slaps every time. Pride and Prejudice is great because both characters have these, like, very distinct character flaws that they have to work out with each other in order to become self-actualized as individuals and to deserve each other in the end. And like, I think that is the most interesting version of this trope, even though it is a trope that like once you see it, you're like, oh, so this is an enemies to lovers story. But like, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for people to challenge each other and to, through, yes, sexy conflict, become better people at the end. And I think that the enemies to lovers trope is a really lovely staging for that kind of story. And that's the kind of story I like to watch. And again, I like to watch hot people argue. Yeah. I was in speech and debate for 6 years. It's definitely a thing of mine. I like watching hot people argue. So my other recommendations for this, because as you all know, I'm insane. For books, and this one is like, the book is better than the movie for a lot of reasons. The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. There is a Hulu version. It's fine, but like the way that this book is written and like the way you get the interiority of the characters from a first-person book is never going to be able to translate well to screen. So I highly recommend, if you like enemies to lovers romance, Hating Game by Sally Thorne is like a big deal for a reason. I will also say this is also getting adapted into, I think, a movie, maybe a TV show. I'm not sure. Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. Very good. I don't love the writing style as much, but the characters are so good. And the story is really fun. So I can definitely get behind it. Battle Royale by Lucy Parker is like basically the Great British Bake Off if the Simon Cowell judge fell in love with like the sparkliest, like most colorful former contestant, and eventually had to work together. Just great. Very fun. And then for movies, the only good, in my opinion, Netflix rom-com pretty much, Set It Up. I've watched it twice in the past month because Set It Up, I just love it. There's stuff that's wrong with it, but it's so good. The leads have so much chemistry, and it's very good. Highly recommend Set It Up. And then obviously the Buffy Spike arc in Buffy has always been a soft spot for me. There are elements of it.
Super problematic.
There's elements of it that are problematic, but like I was reading something the other day about like what was so fun about that relationship is that like Spike's character growth happened while he still canonically doesn't have a soul.
Yeah.
And like it was proof that like good decisions aren't always unselfish. And so maybe as humans we can like give ourselves a break, because I think that some people get very up in arms about like, well, you made a good decision but you did it selfishly, so you're still a bad person. And I think that the Spike kind of arc is an interesting alternative view of that. And also that actor is just so fun. He is
so fun. That's a great segue into my next one, but also just to talk about that a little bit. There is already a Buffy podcast, but like we could talk about that forever because I am forever Team Spike, even though he is so problematic.
Oh, so problematic. But like I consider that just Joss Whedon being a bad guy not the character.
Right. But also, like, if just comparing him to Angel is horrific without a soul, and look at what Spike was capable of without a soul. And the fact that he gets held accountable for things he did without a soul, but Angel never does, was always a big pet peeve of mine.
Yeah, for sure. 100% agree. Actually, Angel will come up in a later part of my tropes conversation. But What is your next trope?
The Chosen One. sort of storyline.
Interesting.
I'm into it. I like
That's such a normie trope. Talk
it is
about
such a normie trope. Well, it's because of Buffy. I mean,
Sure.
you know, I think also just high level or like high concept things that I enjoy when I go that route, they tend to be chosen one type
Sure.
of things, like Buffy, like Harry Potter, like, I mean, I'm not really a big Star Wars fan, but yeah, I tend to like, even like The Matrix, I tend to like this idea of someone being chosen. And I think it's because of my early, love of Buffy and
for sure.
And that. But the thing that's sort of a pet peeve of mine within that is that these storylines always, 90% of the time, steal their concepts from yoga and Eastern religion and spiritual practices, and they never center, South Asian or East Asian or really people of color, generally speaking.
Sure. Yeah.
Even like Keanu Reeves in The Matrix was like casting, he was sort of down the line after a variety of options. And it was just sort of like lucky that he happened to be Asian. But yeah, I that's one that I just am like a big fan of. And that goes hand in hand with another thing that I had on the list. So I guess I just kind of wanted to connect them. But sure. The like magical minority trope really pisses me off.
Okay. So this is an example of a trope you do not like.
Right. Yes. But it's this like weird, I have this weird sort of like tug and pull with that, because what I just said were like certain spiritual practices or just like things that are used to show like a woo-woo kind of person are often associated with like basic white girlness, but they're actually Eastern spiritual practices. Sure. And so when it's like a character in a movie that is like the mystical Asian or sort of magical other, it's frustrating when it is othering an Asian person, or also it's Black people, like the magical Negro trope, and very often Indigenous people as well. So that like is frustrating. But then when I see it, that same kind of thing, but then it's a white person, it like annoys me just as much in a different way, because it's appropriating it without even giving credit. And it's like, I don't know how I feel. I'm kind of like, maybe it should be, would I rather it have been a South Asian person in that role? Because at least there would be a level of authenticity to where that stuff is coming from. But then it would just be perpetuating this trope.
Well, I think that the trope, the big problems with like how that trope gets used, even when it's attempting to like marry performer to like origin of the trope, is that like they're always a sideline character. Right. Like it's obviously different if like they're the chosen one, if they are the central or one of the central characters, but that's almost never the case. So it usually is just going to be blanket problematic when you never center those stories, even when you're trying to do them justice.
Right. And like even, I mean, Star Wars, the Force is yoga. The Matrix, that's yoga as well. It would be one thing even if the chosen one wasn't of Asian descent, but if like all the characters were diverse, and so the one character of color isn't like this stereotype.
Sure. Singled out, kind of.
Right. Like you can have someone who's like the woo-woo character in a thing be a person of Asian descent if you also have other Asian characters who aren't that stereotype. And that's like the thing that's missing. But so often it's like white media, people making this stuff. And so I guess what I'm saying is like, I just want non-white people making these stories so that we can start having like authentic representation of the spiritual practices that get appropriated all the time in these narratives, and have them be authentically represented by where they originate from, without stereotyping those characters as like the singular version of what it looks like to be Asian. Sure. And yeah, so I had a couple of like within that I thought did it kind of okay. So one, again, not a big Star Wars fan, but I did really like in, I guess, the second one of
Last
the
Jedi?
new series.
I was actually hoping that we could get to this because I have lots of thoughts about Star Wars related to the Chosen One trope, because I do think my big problem with Chosen One trope as a concept is that it often undermines characterization rather than like holding someone up. And I think The Last Jedi is a good example of a cool idea that was immediately fucking undercut. Spoiler alert for the third Star Wars movie of the new trilogy.
That's exactly
sucks.
the point that I was going to make. Yeah, as someone who's not a big fan, but I've, seen them all. The one thing I liked about that one was that she isn't from this amazing legacy.
This one fucking bloodline that isn't even supposed to exist because, like, canonically Jedis. I guess there was an interview where George Lucas was like, Jedis can fuck, they just can't get married or fall in love. And it's like, that seems like a weird distinction, George, but okay. But yeah, this one magical family who's like, we're not supposed to do this, but we keep doing it. Thank God, because all of us are special. Anyways, continue.
Right. Well, because it also, I feel like, ties... You love Star Wars. I'm like, they're fine. I think the original second one, what's it called?
Empire Strikes Back.
Yes, Empire Strikes Back is like a good
incredible movie.
Yes,
such a good
it's
movie.
like a great movie in a series of fine movies. Yeah. That's my feeling.
Completely fair.
But that's what I like about it, though, because it also ties back, even though there's no fucking South Asians in any of this entire series.
I mean, that's just like a problem with sci-fi in general. Like Firefly is a really cool like show with like all these Asian languages and no Asian characters. What the fuck?
Right. But for this, because the Force is specifically stealing from yoga, like straight up, that's at least one like tenet is that anyone can meditate and become all of these things that the movie says, but in like a different, all different language. And that was the one thing that I thought like, oh, they did this well. And it's not some like this idea that you inherit it and that it's a legacy and it's like a caste thing because that's from South Asian culture. And so that was the one thing that I liked. But then they totally like fuck it up with the third one and screw over their characters of color. So yeah.
Yeah, they screw over everyone. I actually, as we were talking about this, though, like one of the other obviously like big tentpole fantasy trilogies, Lord of the Rings, I think actually does do an interesting sort of inversion of Chosen One tropes where Frodo isn't the Chosen One. He inherits the ring from his weirdo uncle from a children's book. And basically it's just like, well, this is a horrible thing. And I have it, so I guess it's my duty. And like, he wasn't chosen in any particular way. He is not particularly special, but that is what is special about him. And like, there's been a lot of like academic, writings about sort of like Lord of the Rings and Frodo as the protagonist. But I do think it was always like really nice where it's like, this is just a little guy who likes to garden and eat food, but he has this horrible burden and he could have passed it off to anyone at any time. He could have said, this is not my problem, somebody else deal with this, but he didn't. He is the chosen one because he chose to be. And I think that's really lovely.
Totally. And then the other thing that came to mind because I brought up the magical minority trope is Gremlins, which is one of my favorite movies.
I haven't seen Gremlins.
Oh my God. There's a lot of like, you could read into the Gremlins as a racist depiction of like a variety of characters of color. Like you could read it as Black people, you could read it. There's a lot of them being coded as Italians in it. Like there's a lot, if you watch it, there's a lot of like potential racism. And like, so yes. And also it is racist in how the creatures are discovered. It's like, it is the mystical Asian trope. They're in Chinatown. They go into this shop with this Chinese shopkeeper who has like a glass eye and a long beard. And so it's very problematic in those dated 80s ways. It's from 1989. But it's also just such a fun movie. And the one thing I was going to say that I like about it that I think it does better than other 80s movies that have the sort of mystical Asian trope is at the end of the movie. I'm going to spoiler it. Sorry, Brie. It doesn't spoil anything really, though. The whole movie
It's from 1989. It's my own fault.
Right. And you should watch it at Christmas time before you go into your rom-com, like nothing but Christmas rom-com.
Sure,
I recommend bridging sort of Halloween and Christmas. Just check out Gremlins. But the final scene...
I'm writing it down.
Good. The final scene is Mr. Wing, the guy who owns the shop, the Chinatown shop, who has, Gizmo, who's the creature's name is Mogwai.
Mm-hmm. I did know that.
his name is Gizmo, but the name of the creatures, they're Mogwais, which is Cantonese for devil. Which I don't think the movie tells you. It's one of those like random trivia things I know.
Yeah, like Darth Vader is Darth Father.
Right, right. But he shows up and tells the white people that they were irresponsible and they can't handle the responsibility of owning the Mogwai because they let them get wet and fed them after midnight and did all the wrong things and chaos ensued. And so I do like that it is basically being like white Americans are not responsible enough with these tropes to do them respectfully and to get to enjoy a Mogwai friend. So like that, I think, is the one thing that movie does well in terms of, at least that's how I'm choosing to interpret it.
Our art belongs to its consumers.
That's
Death
right.
of the artist, etc.
Right. That was, I guess, kind of 2 in 1, like a I really like this, but I hate this piece of it. Mm-hmm. And the ways in which the people of color never get to be the chosen one, except when they're playing this like magical side character that's there to guide the white protagonist.
Right. That happens to women a lot too. Like Lego Movie, for instance, and, insert a million other movies here where it's like the female character is good at everything. Ant-Man is another good one. And then has to train the unremarkable chosen one white guy who becomes her love interest because he earns her respect. But it's only because she trains him to be respectful. He gets to do the cool stuff. And then he's like, hey, babe, what's up? That happens to that as well. I think men just need to stop making movies. That's just like my hot take for this middle of the episode. So we already kind of talked about fake dating, but that's definitely my next one, fake dating. Right. I just finished the second book that I wrote this year. Everybody, remember how I wrote a book in our last solo episode? I wrote another one, and this one has fake dating. I haven't done it great yet, but like, I always knew I was going to have to because fake dating is definitely one of my favorite tropes because I think it pairs well with like the forced proximity trope, which I also really like. So I guess I'll combine those two because like, when you're trying to tell a story about 2 people who like need to make changes, who are going to fall in love, like you have to make sure that they are together frequently enough to affect each other and to like start to negotiate their relationship in a new way from potentially the beginning. And so fake dating is obviously an easy way to force them to have to be together and put them in situations where like that are romantic, even if they don't feel romantic towards each other yet. And I like that a lot. I just think it's neat.
I like that too. I like it because I feel like it grows from friendship. And that's always a fun thing to see.
Or if not friendship, because we did talk about like enemies to lovers and fake dating often being paired with each other. If not friendship, at least teamwork. Like they have to be partners. They have to work together.
Friendship somewhere falls in there. Like within the falling for each other, first there is this like companionship happening of like, oh, I actually don't mind being around you. Oh, I actually enjoy being around you. And then I'm in love with you. But yeah.
Yeah, totally. I also like, as a person who's a big fan of just sort of like, I don't think this is a trope, but competence porn. Just like people being good at stuff. I think like people having to like learn to work together is definitely a thing that I enjoy watching. And this isn't just for romance reasons, but also just in general. Like when 2 characters are forced to like work together against incredible odds. Oh, I love that shit. I eat that shit up. Frodo and Sam getting separated from the rest of the fellowship and having to be like these 2 little guys traipsing across like terrifying monster trails to do one little thing together. Like, that's great. I love that. I love watching people like beat the odds by working together. I'm sure Christina's never heard of anything like this, certainly not centrally to her next project. And so I know you agree with me. But yeah, like that's fake dating forces you to do that. So just some high level recommendations here. If you're looking for a movie related book, because I've been trying to read books about romance novels about like the film industry, just because like I'm writing books about the film industry, and so I'm looking to see what's out there. There's a great fake dating one called How to Fake It in Hollywood by Ava Wilder, where 2 actors fake date because their publicist sets them up because both of them need a career boost that the other person could help them with. One guy's like kind of a washed up actor who needs to be brought back into respectability, and the other one is like a slightly younger actress who is in one of those like CW shows and got written off, and so she's trying to like, she's doing the adult version of like getting over being a Disney kid kind of thing, where it's like, I need to be taken seriously. And so they fake date to, you know, grant each other their legitimacy for their careers. And then, oh my goodness, they fall in love. So that's a pretty good one. Spanish Love Deception by Elena Armas is a pretty like bog standard. I need a date to a wedding because my family is really clingy, but very fun version of one. And then two of my favorite books that I've read this year, Luck of the Draw by Kate Claiborne, which is also Enemies to Lovers, and The Love Hypothesis by Allie Hazelwood, which has an asexual lead. Technically, actually, both of the main leads are asexual, but you don't really know that the guy is until she released a like bonus chapter of the guy's perspective of their sex scene, their first sex scene, and it confirms that he is also demisexual, gray asexual, and I like that a lot. A+. And then, of course, I guess another Netflix movie. That's fine. This is one of the better ones, but it's still, I would say, certainly not as good as Set It Up. The To All the Boys I've Loved Before obviously starts with a fake dating premise. Can you think of any other fake dating movies? I guess like The Wedding Date is a good one. A good one, parentheses.
It's not a good movie, though.
Yeah, it's a good example of the trope. I don't know if I would recommend it. Yeah, I was like, let me walk that back, because there's a lot of conversations, thankfully now, happening about like the sort of grossness of like the sex worker trope in fake dating and all of that stuff. So I don't want to wade into that right now. But that's just the first example that came to mind.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like probably not the original, but the first one that I can recall would be Can't Buy Me Love from the 80s with Patrick Dempsey and some blonde actress that I can't really, I don't know if she ever did anything else.
Oh, I guess The Proposal is also one. I recently rewatched that. Doesn't hold up as much as I thought it would.
I think they're both charming. That helps that movie, but the storyline is no.
Yeah.
Because she's a truly abusive boss. In the beginning. And so there's really not enough that happens there for it to be okay. Like she needs to go to therapy at some point for that to be not just like someone falling for their abuser's love bombing or something. Like it just doesn't quite.
I mean, that's definitely one of those enemies to lovers that's like a little more problematic. And like I think that is inherent to like boss assistant or like boss employee enemies to lovers stuff. Those require a level of buy-in to the fantasy that I rarely can get behind. So
one of my favorite, I guess, like kind of in this territory, subversions of that trope is the movie, what the hell is it called? It just slipped my mind. While You Were Sleeping. Did you ever see that?
Oh, yeah. That was also another Sandra Bullock one, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. But what's like fun about that is that one of them is in a coma and she's pretending that they're dating, and it subverts that typical storyline in a fun
There's
way.
A historical romance that I read that's basically an adaptation of While You Were Sleeping, but like in Regency era, that I thought was very funny. And the same thing happens, like spoiler alert, the coma guy's not the love interest.
Yes, exactly.
All right, next one for Christina.
Next one for me is... so horror movies, I really love when they subvert the damsel in distress. Like, even when it's so basic, I always get a kick out of it when it turns out that the person that's supposed to be the damsel is actually the monster in whatever capacity. And like a Girl Walks Home Alone at Night is a good example of that if you want more of like an art house kind of approach. You could watch my short film, The Gaze. That's an approach as well. But yeah, that's just a fun one.
Cool. Well, I guess I'll talk about Force Proximity for a second, because yes, it's a romance trope, and I know I've been talking about a lot of romance guys. I'm in a mood, okay? But the rest of mine are not romance ones, and this is sort of a straddling two elements. So like Force Proximity has always been a favorite of mine in storytelling because it's like putting people in a pressure cooker, and like we already know I like arguments. I especially like it in TV because for the same reasons that I like TV, which is that we get to see people we care about in a lot of different situations. Like that's always, and it allows actual time for growth that I think doesn't always happen with shorter pieces of media. But the movie that most recently just really vibed well with me with forced proximity in it is Palm Springs, which I think we talked about in our last bonus episode of last year when we were talking about recommendations. Palm Springs is just an excellent movie. I also rewatched that recently, but that one, they're stuck together. It's just basically just the two of them. Very, very good. But then I would also say like any like bottle episode of a TV show where the characters are stuck. Always one of my favorite episodes. Bad Breaks from Burn Notice. The pinnacle for me of great television is an exceptional episode, and it's because the main character is stuck in a bank heist. Basically, any bank heist episode of like a procedural or even a non-procedural is almost always going to be better because it's like you're forced to like be really competent with limited materials, and you really get to see like who is this person at their barest, and that's what forced proximity gives you. The one, I think it's the first or maybe the second Christmas episode of Bones. Bones is a complicated show, but that is a very good episode. It's very emotional because they're all like under quarantine at the lab on Christmas. They were all hoping to get home, but there's like a SARS scare, I think. And so like everyone in the lab who like had these family Christmases like is stuck there, and the main character is like had no Christmas plans, and she's like, this is fine for me, I wasn't gonna do anything. And so it's like the meaning of Christmas, we're all stuck together and we have to like make our own family, blah blah blah. Anyways, forced proximity, excellent forced proximity. And for my book recommendations, I will say pretty much any Emily Henry book is going to get you there because she likes to kind of just like shut people away and make them fall in love. Beach read and book lovers both have they're stuck in a small town together and are forced to participate in things together enough that they fall in love. And then also, if you want a clean romance, one without sexy scenes, The Party Crasher by Sophie Kinsella is one of my favorite books that I've read this year. It's one of the funniest books that I've read this year. Premise is a woman like in her late 20s. Her parents get divorced a couple of years before like the true start of the book, and her dad is now 2 years later or whatever selling their family home that she's always loved, and she has fallen out with her father and his new girlfriend, and they're the ones who are selling the house, and they throw like a big like weekend party as like a going away party for like this big old, you know, crusty house, and she is sort of invited but not really invited and doesn't want to attend for passive aggressive reasons, but there is like an old childhood toy or something at the house that she wants to like get, so she sneaks into her own childhood home while this party is going on, and then ends up kind of just like getting stuck and has to keep like hiding under tables while like big dramatic family conversations are happening, or, you know, is like in the roof, you know, in like the attic. Like, so like the story just kind of keeps getting more absurd as she like keeps having to hide from people while she's looking for this old childhood toy. And the guy that her ex-boyfriend is there and ends up having to kind of like help her stay hidden, and then like more and more people become aware of her and also have to keep her hidden, and it's just like a comedy of a lot of stuff, and she is like stuck in this house with all these people that she has really complicated relationships with for an entire weekend. It's very funny and a good example of more lighthearted forced proximity.
Yeah. I actually was on my list was bottle episodes. And so it's essentially the same thing. And I think, you know, comedies always do it best. I know that Seinfeld has one that's in a Chinese restaurant. That's like a classic. Friends also has one that's also really famous, where no one's ready. There was a really good version of that. Who talked about it? I think it was Jess who talked about it in our inclusive screenwriting episode, where Jay-Z did a like Black version of that episode of Friends with Black actors. And it was like a commentary on how you can't just like slap diversity on a show written for white people by white people. Anyway, that's a tangent. I'm not necessarily recommending that episode. But Superstore, I think, has a really good one, but I can't recall.
Oh, yeah. The one where I think they've had it twice, actually. Once, I think they just get trapped in the store because, like, the company is trying to cut costs. And so, like, they, like, turn everything off at night, but it means that, like, none of them can get out. But then there's a season finale at one point that I think is also kind of a bottle episode when there's a tornado warning. And they all are stuck in the store while this, like, tornado is raging outside.
Yeah. But I would say like one of my favorites is the Community episode where they're trying to figure out who stole Annie's pen.
Oh,
I don't know
yeah.
if you remember that.
Yep.
And they refuse to leave the room until someone owns up to it, which I think is also tying back to my love of the sort of one of us
Whodunit.
did it. Yeah, the
Yep.
whodunit. That's like a perfect mix of those two things.
I mean, like those have to go together, right? Like even Clue, it's like they're stuck in the same
Right,
house. Like
yes.
it's hard to have a whodunit if people are just sort of like wandering around.
Right, yeah.
So yeah, great combo.
That's why I think like slashers, like if you're stuck in
Sure.
a school or you're just like your car broke down and you're stuck in the woods, like, and those two definitely go hand in hand.
Yeah, I think Green Room would be a good example of like a thriller
Yes,
horror that's like it's not
totally.
exactly single location. Like there's like there's 2 or 3 primary locations, but the main like most of the movie is set at the like Nazi club.
Mhm.
It's a punk band who's performing at a club that they as they're performing realize is like a white supremacist like skinhead bar, and then they get trapped in their green room by the skinheads and have to escape.
Yeah,
Really good movie.
it is a really good movie. Intense.
Very intense. Definitely intense. As soon as you're like a punk band stuck in a Nazi bar, it's like, okay, so this is gonna go places. What's your next one?
So my next one, kind of in similar vein, I love when we get to see the same thing from multiple character perspectives, like when we
Like the
rewind
Rashomon
back.
kind of.
Yeah. And I think Community also has an episode like that
Mhm.
where it's when they're with the dice.
Yeah, the Darkest Timeline episode.
Yes, and you watch the same thing from everyone's perspective. That's obviously a brilliant episode of TV, but it's done, very well in a variety of ways. Like Pulp Fiction is a famous movie example of that, where like something that is sort of a throwaway moment suddenly becomes like super important or super funny because of the new context that you're seeing it in. That's always a favorite of mine. One of the movies I watch, I wouldn't say every Christmas, but like when I'm in the mood for a non-Christmassy Christmas movie, one of those years where it's like I'm tired of all the usuals, there's a independent-ish movie from I think 1999 called Go. Have you seen that? Probably not.
I have not.
There's one storyline that's like, who the hell cares? It's like a bunch of guys going to Vegas, and theirs is like the least interesting storyline, but it's one. The main character is a cashier at a supermarket, and she's just trying to get her shift. Like she switches shifts or something. I can't remember exactly what the catalyst is, but it turns into just like a night that goes horribly, awfully wrong. And you see it from a variety of different perspectives. And it's a fun, very like 90s, late teen, early 20s kind of a sort of like
Romp.
indie comedy of errors.
Sure.
Also sort of dark thriller, just like Wild Night kind of a thing.
Sure. Okay, I'll definitely have to check that out because I always am looking for alternative Christmas movies. I just remembered, like, how did I not mention Die Hard for forced proximity? Of course, Die Hard has to be up there for forced proximity. Come on, all this girly love stuff on my brain has poisoned me against Die Hard. But I wanted to say about the Rashomon kind of effect. One kind of not quite subversion, but it's like an alternative version of the Rashomon trope that I like. There was it was I saw it most recently in an episode of Never Have I Ever. One of the versions of this that I like is when it's not another character's perspective, it's the same character's perspective, but with new context. So like I think the I don't remember what season it is because I recently watched the entirety of Never Have I Ever again with my mom and my partner, but there is an episode at some point where Davy is dating someone. I don't remember which boy she's dating at this particular time, and she thinks back to a scene from an earlier episode, now thinking that like somebody else is being more flirtatious than she actually is, and so the scene plays out again, but like everyone's tone of voice is slightly different. So it's the exact same scene in the same words, but different performances now that she has a different perception of events. And I always find that funny.
That is funny, yeah.
And I will also say the other comedy version that's like an additional kind of alt to the Rashomon is there's an episode of Leverage, which is Rashomon-y, but in addition to it being just like general Rashomon, like you're saying the same heist from everyone's perspective, is the way in which the other characters portray each other. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, when they do their retelling, like one character's super Southern. He's like, I don't even have a Southern accent. And they're like, I don't know. You just kind of look like you would, though. So that's how I
Yes.
remember you. And it's like that kind of stuff where like then it becomes this sort of competing perception thing and you get to see the scene, but with like other characters like acting very strangely just because that's how the other characters are either retelling it for comedy or genuinely remembering it. And that's
Yes.
also good.
Not like a perfect example, but Knives Out is a movie that does
Sure.
that. Even if not in actually like watching the same scene, you're hearing
Mhm.
the same thing, but from a totally different perspective and
Sure,
adding
yeah.
layers of comedy. Like how they all say that she's like the main character's from a different country.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so there's just like layers of comedy in hearing someone else's telling of the same thing you've already seen or possibly showing you the same scene from a different perspective.
It's a helpful trope to really dig into human nature and perception and how reality is not always the same.
And like develop characters.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? Like because you develop characters through their bias, through just like the way that they see the world, who they focus on, like you just said, how they perceive other people. Like it's just a fun way to develop a character without possibly having to write dialogue that will do that or even give you their backstory, but just like the way that they're perceiving a situation tells you who they are in comparison to someone else and how they perceived it.
Totally. No, I think that's a great point. I'm going to combine two tropes because they're similar in vein. So this is a TV trope primarily, and it's the first one. Neither of these have like a name, or they might, and I just don't know it. Somebody who knows TV tropes, let me know. But I like it when there is a like boring character who gets an evil twin version that the same actor gets to play, and it's obvious they're having way more fun. So like Angel. I told you we were going to talk about Angel.
Yeah.
But also there's a like half a season of Supernatural back when I watched that show where Jared Padalecki gets to be like evil version of him. It might be him without a soul. It might be him possessed. I don't actually remember the circumstances. I do know that that's the first time I ever saw Jared Padalecki act. It was much more fun. He's a much more interesting character. And like, no offense, Angel, I like you a lot, but like, you're more fun when you're evil. So like a character who's normally boring, but is more fun when they're evil. And then I will say a sub kind of trope to this that I also like, that Angel also fits into, is flamboyant villains having a good time. And I don't mean flamboyant in like the gay coded way necessarily. I just mean like evil characters who like fucking love being evil. Because I think there's absolutely a place for more villains in media that genuinely believe in like the things that they're doing. They're just like doing it in an evil way. But I have to say, especially as someone who loves genre TV, I like seeing a villain who's just like, hell yeah, I'm a villain. I'm the worst guy ever. And it's just like very casually like, yeah, like unapologetic. So like Sylar from Heroes is the pinnacle of this trope to me. Certainly like obviously beginning of Heroes. I tried to rewatch Heroes recently just because I love Sylar so much. And I was like, no, I can't do it. I can't rewatch this show. It's way too melodramatic. But the character of Sylar is so fucking funny. He's so just like even keeled. He's like, I'm just a guy who sucks, who kills people. And I don't know. It just appeals to me. I have no deep reason for it. I just think it's fun.
Yeah, characters you love to hate. Like, they're always fun. And Angel, I think, is that for me because I found Angel so boring for the first season and a half. And I think once he gets his own show, he gets more of a personality and he's much more enjoyable to watch on Angel. But on Buffy, he's just so boring, except when he's Angelus.
Yeah, agreed. And then he wears his tight little pants and kills people, and you're like, go off.
And is like quippy and having fun.
I think it's just that. It's like, I think the reason that I like this trope is because of the contrast of like the status quo of these types of characters. They're so buttoned up, and it's like, finally, this person gets to be free, you know? And I think Spike, I guess, would also be a good example of flamboyant villains having a good time because, like, I think there's just like, I don't know, there's something cathartic about the unapologeticness of someone who's just like, this is who I am and where I'm at. And if you don't like it, maybe I'll kill you. Who knows? The night is long.
He's definitely the perfect example of that. Like, not because Angel's a great example of someone being boring and then when they get to be this other version of it. But Spike is just that from the beginning. And it's great because he gets to be funny. I think that's like what those villains get to have is...
That's a good point.
humor about it. And so it's hard to not find that enjoyable, because who wants to, I don't know, it's like, it's really boring if someone's either has no personality and they're doing horrific things, or they're so tortured about it that there's like there's no sort of conflict to that. And it's like, okay, well, I don't know. It's just, yeah.
After a while, it's like, this is just a bummer. Like, you gotta loosen up. I get that, like, you know, there's some supernatural reasons why, like, you could lose your shit at any time, and so you have to, like, be very, like, even keel. But, like, come on, dude. Give me something.
Yeah.
I have 2 other short ones.
Good. Maybe I'll join in on them with you.
So this one, I don't even have a specific example from. I guess it is also a romance trope. I didn't organize these well. It's fine. This is also an argument-related trope, but I can't help it. I love it when the first time a character says I love you is during an argument. Like, I love when, like, there is an argument and they're getting exasperated and frustrated, and, like, the sort of catharsis of the argument is like, well, I love you, okay? Or, like, because I love you. Or, you know, like, when a declaration of love is expressed in frustration for the first time. I just think it's neat.
Yeah.
I just think it's fun. It always does it for me. Like Christine, my other writing partner from our writing partners episode, she is a big fan of when people do title drops. I hate that shit. I can't do it. But she's like, honestly, anytime someone like says burn notice on burn notice, I'm like, hell yeah, that's the name of the show. She has her own rules for that, but like that's her thing. For me, it's the literally anytime it for any reason a character expresses their love for the first time in an argument, I'm there.
Fun fact, that is how my husband first told me he loves me.
No way! Oh, I love that. That's hilarious.
Yes.
That's incredible. Incredible stuff. Okay, and so then my final trope, I just called it the I'm Spartacus trope, even though I haven't seen Spartacus, but it's the moment in usually some kind of like war or, you know, sci-fi genre project where a character's like identity must be concealed for one reason or another, and a group of people come together to help them conceal it. So like the moment from I'm Spartacus, I looked it up on YouTube to double check that like this is the right movie, and it is. For whatever reason in Spartacus, I haven't seen it. I didn't bother to look it up. Have you seen Spartacus?
No.
Okay, it doesn't matter. It's a movie, and Spartacus's identity, I guess, is important, and like there's a bunch of guys that are like about to be put to death, and they're like, either all of you can die, or the one of you who is Spartacus can make himself known and we'll just kill him. And so a guy stands up and he's like, all right, well, I'm Spartacus. And then somebody else further into the group is like, I'm Spartacus. And so they're all just like shouting, I'm Spartacus, like as this show of solidarity. And I think either Spider-Man, I think it's Spider-Man 2 where this happens.
I have other examples.
Perfect. But like that kind of shit, it gives me the chills in the same way that like the unlikely hero chosen one trope does, where it's like, it's just an example of humanity banding together. They don't have to. There's no, like, they might actually get hurt if they show this level of solidarity, but they do it because it's the right thing to do. Oh, that shit is excellent. Excellent. Other examples, please. I want it in my veins.
Just on a tangent. I love it when it's regular people banding together. To go back to my own psychology a little, I think I love chosen one narratives because as a teenager, I had a lot of responsibility thrust upon me. Like I had to basically raise my cousins after school, and it was like family responsibility of ways I needed to step up and grow up and be an adult, and I felt like I had the weight of the world on my shoulders. And so I think that just like resonates with me strongly, where it's like, it's kind not of like a choice.
Validates that like you are mature and
right. It's like, it's not a choice, but I have to do it because only I can.
Sure.
And like that's how I felt as an adult. I would say I resent that. So now I'm like, I want to choose to step up if that's what I want, but you know, whatever.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But a more recent example of your trope is in, I think, season 1 of Sex Education, where they're trying to figure out whose vulva. It's a photo of a vulva. And it's, I can't remember the character's name.
I don't remember. I haven't seen season 1 in a while, but I know what you're talking about. I do remember this.
It's the character who's like the mean girl, that she's like the rich mean girl.
The one who he dates in season 3.
Yeah, in season 3. It's hers. but the South Asian actress, whatever her name is,
Ruby.
stands up and says it's hers. Yes, it's Ruby's. It's definitely Ruby's, and I believe she's in a fight with, Olivia. Her character's name is Olivia. Simone Ashley plays her. She was just in Bridgerton.
Yeah.
So they were in a fight, but then she ends up like standing up and saying it's hers. I'm pretty sure she's the first one to do it, but then everyone says it's theirs. And they all stand up for her, even though she's a bully. And I don't know if everyone knew it was hers or if it was just like on principle that they weren't going to allow anyone to shame a woman in school for having a photo of her vulva out there. But yeah, that was the example that came to mind.
Yeah. It's just like, it's such a like distilled like solidarity of humanity kind of thing. And it gives me the chills every single time. Like thinking about the Spider-Man scene. Oh my gosh, so good. Like thinking about that scene. Like it gives me a jolt of hope that you don't get every day. And I think that's what a good trope does. It's like it gives you a jolt of something that's like, it feels settled. Like because it's a common enough structure, you can do a lot with it. Like there are inflexible elements of it that allow so much freedom in other elements. And so it's like very comforting to get to see. And it doesn't always have to be a comforting version of the trope. Like I'm not saying that like only comfort here, but like I do think there is something comforting about like the cultural knowledge of a trope can make a new version of a trope story even more powerful. And I think that's cool that like what's exciting about tropes is all that has come before. Like we all have to sort of agree to this sort of encyclopedia of cultural understandings for it to make sense. And it means that like you can't just watch one thing. You have to watch a lot of things. You have to engage with a lot of stories. And I like that tropes sort of invite you to seek out other kinds of stories after you've seen one that you like, because, hey, we all need more excuses to engage with different kinds of art and explore it. And tropes give you an easy sort of way of starting out before you can branch out on your own.
That's right. That's a great ending sentiment, but I also just want to bring up another example.
Great.
Because we were talking about sex education and that reminded me of the bottle episode. I don't know if it's entirely a bottle episode or just like half of it is a bottle episode. There's probably stuff happening with the boys in it, but the girls are all in detention together. It's in the second season, and it's when Amy is dealing with PTSD from her assault on the bus, and all the characters are forced together and they have to realize that they have, more in common than differences. And they bond over basically just like being victimized by men. Unfortunately, that's the thing that they all find they have in common. And then they all ride the bus with her at the end. And it's just such a lovely...
I was thinking about the bus scene, even though it's not exactly I'm Spartacus, but it is a matter of like...
It's like that sort of
group solidarity. Yeah. Great stuff. Great stuff.
That show's great.
Yeah, it is a very good show. I was definitely going to bring it up in our end of year Patreon episode where we talk about like what we watched this year.
They just announced that what's his name from Schitt's Creek? David from Schitt's Creek is joining the cast. Yes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's joining the cast as I think a teacher, like coming from abroad.
That's exciting. I'm just glad there's going to be more of it because like Netflix is famous for canceling things after 3 seasons.
Yeah, well, when it's white main characters primarily, they're pretty good at keeping it on the air.
Yep, that's it.
Not to say it's not a great show because it 100% is a great show, but a lot of great shows starring characters of color get canceled. So
never have I ever. Has it been confirmed that they're going to have a season 4? Has it already been picked up? This is not a part of the podcast. Now I just want to know.
I don't know if it's been announced, but it has.
It's on IMDb.
Because like never have I ever.
Somebody has added like season 4 as like
I think
we're gonna fill it in later kind of stuff.
I think with signing a deal with Mindy, she probably got extra seasons like in her initial contract.
That makes sense. Okay. Well, that this is completely unrelated to the conversation. Yes. So I guess to finish it off, hey everyone, tell us your favorite tropes. What are your favorite tropes? What are your favorite examples of those tropes? Why? Let's have a conversation. I am always looking for new things that I can watch iterations of endlessly.
Me too. Also, what tropes do you hate? Because that's also fun to talk about.
Yeah, if you guys want us to do like a more negative episode in the future, I'm sure we could come up with some good examples of like tropes we hate.
It would be endless.
Yeah,
though.
it would definitely be endless. But like, we've already talked about problematic faves and like the death of the author kind of concept. So if you want us to talk about death of the structure, let us know.
And if you like more episodes like this, let us know. Just in
Yes.
general, us talking about media in general, not necessarily learning about a subject.
Yeah, because this is our final solo episode of the year before our just like end of year, what did we do this year episode. So we're obviously starting to think about season 3 and what season 3 is going to look like. So if you have a strong preference of what kinds of episodes of our show you like the most and you want to hear more of in the future, we really want to hear from you. So please let us know in all of our spots, which in a second the outro will read you, and are also as always in the episode descriptions. Like, please communicate with us. Tell us. Use your words.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Thanks so much to Kelsey Rauber for our theme music, Kaylee Brown for our podcast art, Ezra Lee for editing this episode, and to all of you for listening. Links to learn more about them are in our episode description.
And thank you to our booby VIPs who are our $10 supporters on Patreon. That's Kim Garland, Amanda Blunt, Anthony Epp, Kelsey Rauber, Norman Steinberg, and Brandy Nicole Payne. If you want your name on that list and or you want to have access to all of our bonus resources related to each and every podcast episode we post for free, you can subscribe for as little as $3 to our Patreon at patreon.com/breakingoutpod.
Or join our free newsletter where we share a new creative prompt each month. Next episode, we begin our Representation Matters mini-series with the Disabled Writers Committee at the WGA West. Be sure to tune in.